FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
Finally, and very briefly, a comment about the decade which is covered in this book, which is called Political Writing from a Decade Without a Name. I've actually written a book, or published a book of essays from each of the last 3 decades, the 1980s, 90s, and this decade without a name, because I refuse to undignify it with the label the noughties, which I think is abhorrent. It's like putting a frilly frock on a sweating bull. Decades are arbitrary divisions of time. Sometimes history chimes with them. Normally it does not. The 1980s, it chimed with the decade. That is to say, 1989, the unforgettable year of wonders 1989, was an extraordinary culmination to the decade. I would say this hasn't been true of the last 2 decades. I would say that as we talk about the long 19th century and the short 21st century, so we should talk about the long 1990s, which really go from the 9th of November 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, which John mentioned, to the 11th of September 2001, from 9/11 written European style to 9/11 written American style. And then this very short decade, which I would argue is already over. Because, I mean, one of the things I have in the book is an account of an extraordinary, not to say surreal, conversation with George W. Bush in May 2001, before his first official trip to Europe. And the interesting thing was that in 2.5 hours of conversation, it may have felt like 2.5 years, it was 2.5 hours, he never once mentioned Islamic terrorists, not once. The world we were talking about in May 2001 was quite different. But I would argue that that decade actually ended, to be precise, on the 4th of November 2008. That it actually only lasted 7 years and barely 2 months. Not just because of the significance of the election of Obama, but also because it came in the context, and I think partly as a result of, the biggest financial crisis for 70 years, the first truly global economic crisis, which also revealed and catalyzed major geopolitical shifts that had been, as it were, nascent before, notably the rise of China and other non-European powers, non-Western powers. So that I think this decade was in many ways shaped and defined still by the United States, particularly by the Bush administration, by what it did, for good or ill, mainly for ill, but also by what it failed to do. I would venture a guess that the next decade, the 2010s, will not be shaped to the same degree by the United States, indeed by the West as a whole. In other words, I think that this is perhaps the last decade in which the United States and the West as a whole was clearly setting the agenda of world politics.